you. I was just saying, let's just start by setting a positive motivation for what we're doing tonight, and we can just think that we're going to be talking about debate, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition of debate, and that our goal in doing this is to develop this tool for clearing our understanding, strengthening our conviction in correct things. And the reason we want to do that is to develop our motivation to be to want to be of benefit to all beings, and to develop our clarity and our ability to serve all beings in that way. So in other words, the reason we're doing everything that we're going to be doing is in order to benefit all beings in the best possible way. So with that intent in our heart, we set out to do all the things we're going to be doing, starting with opening our eyes if they're closed and talking. Let me just pull up my notes. Okay. So, let me tell you what I was thinking for today, and you can tell me if that sounds like it might be helpful or if you have any other ideas. But I was thinking that I could start by reviewing a little bit some of the stuff we talked about last time, and by kind of reviewing the material in the chapter that we read for today about the two valid syllogism forms. And then we could take it from there together and see how that might be useful for us. Any thoughts on that? Does anybody have something else that they'd like us to also include or do? Or okay. All right. So okay. So last time we were talking about we were talking about the syllogism as such, and specifically what makes something a valid syllogism. And a valid syllogism is just, it's a syllogism that has a correct sign, right? Sign, reason are synonyms. So a correct sign. And a correct sign, we were talking about how what that means is that a correct sign is a sign which is the three modes. So it is the property of the subject, it is the forward pervasion, and it is the counter pervasion. And property of the subject means that there's a person who has ascertained that the sign is a property of the subject, and they now are engaged in wanting to know whether the predicate to be proven is also a property of the subject, right? So if I say, the subject Snoopy is a mammal because of being a dog, dog would be a correct sign if there's somebody who knows that Snoopy is a dog and is now trying to determine whether Snoopy is a mammal. That's not that that wouldn't make it a correct sign. That would make it so that the sign is the property of the subject. Any questions about that before we go anywhere? And it does take a bit of practice to kind of hear all those words and understand what they're saying every time, I think. Any questions?
So real quick, you said there was the subject, the forward pervasion, and then what was the third thing?
Counter pervasion.
Counter pervasion.
Okay. So the forward pervasion, I'll tell you the traditional way of explaining the forward pervasion and counter pervasion, and then I'll tell you this alternative way of explaining, which I personally kind of like better. It's fine either way. It's just like enjoy it more somehow. The traditional way of explaining it is that the sign is the forward pervasion if there's somebody who has ascertained that the sign is the property of the subject, and the person also knows, they've also ascertained that whatever has that sign as a property necessarily has the predicate to be proven as a property. The traditional way of saying that is the forward pervasion is that which is ascertained for a person for whom it has become the second mode of the sign in a syllogism, just meaning in this context, as existing exclusively in the similar class, right? So the subject, Snoopy, is a mammal because of being a dog. Is dog the forward pervasion, yes or no? Well, that depends. Is there somebody who knows? Is there somebody who's listening to this and thinking about it who knows that dog only exists within mammals, right? That there are no dogs outside of mammals, right? That's the forward pervasion. And the counter pervasion is that which is ascertained by a person for whom it has become the third mode of the sign of syllogism as universally absent in the dissimilar class. So that means that the person needs to know that that dog completely doesn't exist in the class of everything that is not a mammal. Like if you were to pile all the things that are not a mammal over here, and you were to go through them painstakingly one by one, you would never find a dog. So if somebody knows that, then for them the reason is the counter pervasion. Okay. The non-traditional way of explaining it, the alternative way of explaining it, is that the forward pervasion means that for the person hearing the syllogism, they know that there's of at least one occurrence, that there's at least one instance of the sign in the similar class. And they know that there are no instances of the sign outside the similar class. I think I like that one better because it sets it up in a way that they're not redundant. It's like there are three things going on as opposed to two things, but the second thing is said in two ways. And I find it a little bit easier personally to it breaks it up into more steps, I think. So I can think like, okay, do I know of any dogs that are mammals? Yes. Now, do I know of any dogs that are not mammals? No. Perfect. Right? As opposed to the traditional way where I have to think, okay, do I know of dogs as being exclusively mammals? Yes. Do I know of non-mammals as being exclusively non-dogs? Yes. Okay. But it comes out to the same point. I think I'm making it more complicated than it needs to be. Does anybody have any questions about this?
I have one question.
Sure.
I don't think you mentioned this, and I don't think it's part of it, but something came up in stuff that I was reading.
Mm-hmm.
Do the people talking about the syllogism have to agree that the subject exists in the same way?
That's a great question. That's a great question. And the technical answer is yes. This question goes a little bit beyond the scope of what we need to know to be able to start, but I'll answer it since you asked it to the best of my understanding. If you were to well, I'm trying to think, there's so much to say. Let me start by saying the subject of the syllogism doesn't necessarily have to exist, but we have to be in agreement as to whether it does or not, right? And the way in which it does or not for the syllogism to work. So I could say the subject, the horns of a rabbit, are not impermanent because of not existing, right? So if I say that, that can only be a valid syllogism if both of us know that the horns of a rabbit don't exist, and if both of us know that whatever doesn't exist necessarily isn't impermanent, right? And if you don't yet know that the horns of a rabbit aren't impermanent, you see? So if I were to say, like, if I were to say something, it's okay now because I'm just doing it for the sake of an example, but in theory, if I were to say the subject, the horns of a rabbit, are impermanent because of changing every moment, right? I would have just told a lie, you know? So that would be negative karma. Like I couldn't say that. I couldn't say that syllogism because it just wouldn't be true, right? So if, however, you believe that the horns of a rabbit exist, and you believe that the horns of a rabbit change every moment, but you believe that they're permanent, I'd want to say that to you. I want to show you that there's a contradiction in what you're saying, but I couldn't do it with a syllogism. For that, I would use a consequence, a prasanga, right? And the idea, like the reason the Prasangika school is called the Prasangika school is because it does all of its arguing, all of its proofs through prasangas, through consequences, because they say that if a prasangika is arguing with a non-prasangika, there is nothing that they could put as the subject of a syllogism because they don't have the same belief about how things exist. Does that answer your question?
Yes, exactly. That was exactly what I was reading and they were talking about it. So it's helpful to explain it. I appreciate it.
Good. I'm glad. Yeah, it's a fascinating and complex thing, I think, but I'll leave it there for now. Okay. So this actually, what we were just talking about before, it segues into the topic for this chapter, which is the two valid syllogism forms. And I wanted to start by saying this. This is a topic that I think is important to understand in order to understand the logic of this whole system. And at the same time, this isn't something that you'll need to distinguish in practice during a debate, right? It's a little bit like if you're learning a foreign language, you need to know the terms like adjective versus adverb and what's the difference and so on. But when you're out speaking that language, nobody's going to ask you like, was that an adjective or is that an adverb? You see what I'm saying? Like, it's not something that you'll be called upon to. I just wanted to kind of orient you to like how this fits in. That's my understanding of it. So in the book, so we've talked about the two different kinds of statement that can exist. There are statements of quality and there are statements of pervasion. Statement of quality, Snoopy is a dog. Statement of pervasion, all dogs are mammals. Or, whatever is a dog is necessarily a mammal, right? Statement of quality, dog is a species. Statement of pervasion would be whatever is a dog is necessarily a species, but that's not true. Snoopy is a dog, but he's not a species. Statement of quality, the sky is blue. Statement of pervasion, whatever is the color of the sky is necessarily blue. That's not true either, because the color of the night sky is the color of the sky, but that's not blue, right? So they're very different. They're very different things. And so the book says very succinctly and neatly, it says the following. I wrote this down: a syllogism coordinates a statement of quality with a statement of pervasion to lead us to understand another statement of quality. So syllogism, what it wants us to do is to understand a specific statement of quality. It wants us to know that that statement of quality is true. And so it does that by taking a different statement of quality and a certainly different statement of pervasion and coordinating those two. But I wanted to break down exactly what that means, if I may, and I wanted to think about it this way. A statement of pervasion, whatever is blank is necessarily blank, is a very powerful thing. They're hard to come by through the usual means. I don't know. But if we really truly understand, not just to understand, but like ascertain, if we genuinely know that a statement of pervasion is true, then it allows us to know a lot of other things. That's the beauty of the whole thing. So a statement of pervasion, it allows us to prove something about a given subject. If I know that all men are mortal, that's a statement of pervasion. All men are mortal. Whatever is a man is necessarily mortal. If I really know that, then if I also know that Socrates is a man, then I can put those two things together, and now I know that Socrates is mortal. Right? If I truly know that wherever there's smoke, there's necessarily fire, if I really know that, then when I see smoke, then I'll know that there's fire there. Right? If I know that whatever is produced is necessarily impermanent, if I know that, then the moment I realize that sound is produced, I'll realize that sound is impermanent. To put it more broadly, if I know that whatever has the property A necessarily also has the property B, if I know that, and if I also know that a certain subject has the property A, now I can know that that subject also has the property B, even if I can't see the property B directly. At that point, the fact that it has the property A becomes a sign that it must also have the property B. And it's an infallible sign if there really is a statement of pervasion that I know. Any questions about what I just said? That's the heart of everything. So I want to take a moment if anybody does have questions. I think what I just described is, frankly, it is logic in a nutshell, perhaps. You know, whatever has A necessarily has B. Well, I know that this has A, therefore it must have B. I can be confident that to whatever extent, if I'm confident that whatever has A necessarily has B, and I'm confident that this thing has A, to that same extent, I can be confident that that thing also has B. So that if I have an infallible, reliable cognition that whatever has A necessarily has B, and an infallible, reliable cognition that such and such has A, then I can have perfect knowledge that such and such has B. This is how math works, for example. This is how we can know, we can absolutely know that any whole number whatsoever multiplied by 2 will be even. We can know that. It's not like an article of faith. It's something that we can deduce. Therefore, we can know that 17,428,228,999,427 times 2 is even. I know that. I know that. I know that. I couldn't even tell you the number again, but I know that that's even, right? Why? Because whatever is a number multiplied by 2 is necessarily even. The number I just said times 2 is a number multiplied by 2. Therefore, the number I just said times 2 is even.
So could you say, like, wait, you said any number divisible by 2 is even.
Any number multiplied by 2 is even, is what I said. But
So
what you
could
said
you
is
then,
true too.
so then can you infer that any number divided by 2 is even? I mean, if it comes out with a whole number?
I think you can, but
No,
not
Jenna?
directly.
Oh,
Not directly.
because...
Well, I'm trying to think how to answer that. I'll answer it from the Tibetan logic point of view. From the Tibetan logic point of view, you can't know what you said from what you said before because the word divisible just came up out of nowhere. We haven't defined it yet. You see? We'd have to define what divisible by 2 means. And if we were to define divisible by 2 to mean composed of a different number multiplied by 2, then you could know what you said. It would take a few steps of logic to get from the one to the other. You see what I mean? So if I define divisible by 2 to mean made up of another number other than itself multiplied by 2, then I could say it follows that the subject whatever, like x times 2 is divisible by 2, is even because of being divisible by 2. And then you say, well, how do I know it's divisible by 2? And I'd say, well, it follows that it is divisible by 2 because it is made up of another number times 2. And then you'd say, well, how do you know that? And I'd say, because it is made up of x times 2. And then you'd say, ah. And then I'd say, see, so it is divisible by 2. And you'd say, yes. And I'd say, so you see, so it is even. And you say, ah, yes, I see that now. Something like, I kind of lost the thread somewhere in there, but you kind of get the idea, I think. Right? In Western logic, the system is designed such that it will give you the answers as efficiently as possible and correctly. In Indian logic, which is Tibetan logic, the system is designed, this is what I meant to say. In Western logic, both of them will give you the correct answer. In Indian logic, it's designed to be efficient, even if you can't follow what's going on. In Indian logic, it's designed so that you can follow what's going on at every step, even if it's not efficient. Right? That's why in the book he says that a colleague compared the Western system to building a train to the top of the mountain, whereas he compared the Indian system to teaching everybody how to climb the mountain for themselves. So the interesting thing is that the Western system, therefore, it can't, in my opinion and in my experience, I don't think the Western system of logic can produce the same type of conviction that the Tibetan system can, because even though you know that if you put something in here, what comes out there has to be so, you know that and you trust that, you don't see it happening quite. And so it's a little bit, it's more theoretical somehow. It's less connected to your heart. That's my personal experience, I guess. Whereas here, like every step, you're comparing it to what you know. Like every step, you're having to ascertain it. And so you see it happening from beginning to end. And when you get to the end, you know where you are. So if we think about statements of pervasion, which I was just saying can be so powerful if we really have ascertained them, we can realize that there are two types of correct statements of pervasion that we can make. One type is the range of the first term and the range of the second term are equal. Like the number of things like that have the first term as a property and the number of things that have the second term as a property are equal, and they're the same things. So for example, whatever is a product is necessarily an impermanent phenomenon, right? However many things are that are a product, there are that many things that are impermanent phenomena, and they're the same things. So with these ones, you can flip it around and it will still be true. I could also say whatever is an impermanent phenomenon is necessarily a product. That would also be true because it's talking about the same things by two different names, as it were. These are mutually inclusive. Whatever is an unmarried man is necessarily a bachelor, right? Whatever is the one is the other. Whatever is the other is the one. It's the same range. The other type of correct statement of pervasion is one where the range of the first term is smaller than the range of the second term. So whatever is a product is necessarily an existent, right? There are all the products here, and then there are all the existents which go beyond just that. But product is smaller, it's included inside existent. Whatever is an unmarried man is necessarily a human being. I would venture a guess that there are no unmarried men in this call, right? But there are certainly human beings in this call, right? But if you, so if I couldn't say, if you find me a human being, then I promise you it will be an unmarried man. That's not true. But I could say, if you find me an unmarried man, I can promise you it will be a human being, right? Because the range of unmarried men is smaller than the range of human beings. Does that make sense? Well, based on that, right, it follows that there are two types of correct syllogism. In a syllogism, you're making a statement of quality as your thesis, and then you're implying, like formally implying a statement of pervasion between the reason, the sign, and the predicate to be proven. The subject sound is impermanent because of being a product. I'm saying that the subject sound is impermanent, and I'm implying that whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent, right? So whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent. Okay, the subject sound is impermanent because of being a product. Whatever is an unmarried man is necessarily a bachelor. Okay, then the subject, the Pope, is a bachelor because of being an unmarried man. Does that make sense? Those are examples where the range of the reason and the range of the predicate to be proven are equal. Product, impermanent, equal. So the subject sound is impermanent because of being a product. Unmarried man, bachelor, equal. So the subject, the Pope, is a bachelor because of being an unmarried man, right? But we can also build syllogisms using the other type of statement of pervasion, where one term is smaller than the other. So here, what we want is for the reason, the range of the reason, to be smaller than the range of the predicate to be proven. So for example, we could say, well, whatever is a product is necessarily existent. Product is smaller and existent is larger. Whatever is a product is necessarily an existent. Therefore, the subject sound is an existent because of being a product. Right? Another, whatever is an unmarried man is necessarily a human being. Right? Unmarried man smaller, human being larger. Whatever is an unmarried man is necessarily a human being. Okay, so then the subject, the Pope, is a human being because of being an unmarried man. Right?
Can I try one? Because it's like putting
That's
a lot
what I
of
was going to
pieces
ask
from
next.
Because the Dalai Lama in this book about the Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise, he was talking about the third book, and he said he was talking about that. Well, both of those books talk a lot about having to see emptiness as the 12 nidanas, that they are the same thing. And the last thing that I read, the Dalai Lama was saying in the explanation, was to see that you can't think of emptiness outside of form, which is this phrase, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. To connect to what you're saying, if I put it in there, we could look at it as a forward pervasion. Form is emptiness, but you have to accept this, right? And I guess,
To do
forgive me
that,
if
you
I'm saying
would.
around the Prasangita. But so if I said form is emptiness, emptiness is form, if we accepted that, because they're inside the same thing, then I'd say, okay, if you said my cat is a form, right? Or because that's what it would be pretty easy to accept because there. And I also accept that every form is empty. Therefore, I'd say that my cat is empty. And therefore, accepting all those things, that this would be a syllogism, therefore proving my cat is empty, the wall is empty, that everything in the whole universe is empty. But not, this is just a sort of side note and question. This is where the Prasangita people have to throw up their hands, because everybody else says, you can't do that. You can't just say everything is empty and then
Right.
therefore prove everything is empty. But if we, because I don't think that I don't have a problem with this idea. I think it makes sense to look at those things that they at once, they fit right in the same thing. This doesn't confuse me. So then the syllogism does make sense if it is that you and I, or two people, accept those terms, then I could prove through that syllogism anything that I say is form. I could therefore prove through a syllogism that it would be empty.
Yes. If all of those premises were correct, then it's what you said. Yes. However, and this next part is just specific to the example you just gave. When we say there's two levels to this. One is when we say form. Okay, let me actually take a step back and say this. if I were to go up to somebody and say, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, therefore the cat is empty, I would have proven nothing if they didn't already buy that, which is your point. That's not the proof of it. That would be, like you said, that would be used for somebody who already understands. Then it would just be, and they're just doubtful about the cat, you know? Then you could use that. That's number one. Number two is we have to be careful. Remember predicate versus subject. So when I say form is emptiness, that's not a statement of pervasion. That's a statement of quality, right? And when I say emptiness is form, that's also a statement of quality. So no statements of pervasion were made there. A statement of pervasion would be whatever is form is necessarily emptiness. Whatever is emptiness is necessarily form. That's the second level. The third level is that with the Buddhist forgiveness and indulgence, it's not true that emptiness is form. And it's not true that whatever is emptiness is necessarily form. And I've always wondered about that. And I think if you truly understand the reasoning, it becomes clear that that can't be true. So I've always wondered about that. And one time I was at this large event where His Holiness was teaching, and Alex Berzin, who's like a great scholar, he was there. And I wanted to just go say hello and just thank him for all the help he's indirectly given me. And as I was waiting, he was talking to somebody, and I was waiting for my turn, and I just overheard the person asked him that question. And I would never have thought to ask him the question, but the person asked him, and you know what he said? He said, the problem is the word is. That's not in the original. That's only in the translation. I forget at what point in the translation. I don't know if it's just in the English, but at some point in the translation, somebody translated it with the word is. He said the original says form, emptiness, emptiness, form. And he said, because it's not true that emptiness is form. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's wonderful to know, right? Emptiness is much larger than form. They're not mutually inclusive. See?
Would you say it because it's the quality of many, 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 many? It's an adjective describing how many more things than that are.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's like a bachelor, human being, form, emptiness. So you could say form is empty, and you could say whatever is form is necessarily empty. But you couldn't say emptiness is form. That's just not true. And it's also not true that whatever is emptiness is necessarily form. For example, the number 2 is empty of inherent existence, but it's not form. It's a permanent phenomenon. The horns of a rabbit are empty of inherent existence, but they're not form. They're non-existent. Form refers specifically to physical phenomena. That's why, in the sutra, in the Heart Sutra, Shakyamuni Buddha goes on, or it's not Shakyamuni Buddha, but who says it? Sarvashura? Whoever's saying it says, likewise, mind and consciousness and this and this and this are also empty. Right? Yeah. But that was a great question. Thank you. And what I wanted to do now is I wanted to think through a little bit some other examples. I wanted to hear from you guys some other examples. And I wanted to do it one step at a time. I wanted to do for each for each type of statement of pervasion, let's come up with some examples. And for each example that we think, how could we put it, how could we make it into a syllogism? How could we use it in a syllogism, rather, is what I mean, right? So can you think of some examples of statements of pervasion? And we'll do them one at a time. A statement of pervasion, give me a statement of pervasion where the range of the two terms is the same.
I can think wherever there is water, there is wetness. No, because there could be wetness. No, because I think something like that. That's my first guess.
Sure. No, I like that. I
Water.
like that. That's good. That's a statement of pervasion about existence. It's not about a property, it's about existence, which is perfectly fine. So that's wherever there is water, there necessarily is wetness, right? I'm just thinking, is that necessarily true? It seems true. Can we think of any instance where there's water but not wetness? And can we think about any time when there's wetness but not water? I guess it depends on how we're defining water. I think if we're defining it as H2O, then mercury maybe could be wet without having water. But if we're defining it as like the element of water, then I think it stands, right?
In the liquid state.
Sorry?
In the liquid state.
In the liquid state, yes. I thought of that too. But I think, again, I think if we're talking about water, so like when we think about water as one of the four elements as they're translated, it just refers to cohesion of something. It's not just like the atoms just go off everywhere, you know? So from that perspective, I think we could say wherever there's wetness, there's necessarily water, right? Wait, was that the way you said it, or did you say it the other way? You said wherever there's water, there's necessarily wetness.
Well, I guess I'm confused because in order for it to have the overlap, doesn't it have to go both ways?
It does. I'm just curious, which way would you like to say it?
Well, I no longer
choice.
actually think it works because.
Okay. So
I
let's think of another one.
Yes, let's think of another one.
So could you say something like, all females are women?
Could you say all females are women? Well, you could certainly say it. That's for sure.
What does that work?
Can anybody think of an exception? What would we consider? We would consider that like little infant baby girls. Would we say that they're women?
Well, they're baby women.
They're baby. So I'm genuinely, it's not a gotcha. Like if you think yes, like what about like a female like cat? Would you consider it a woman?
No.
No, then it doesn't work.
Oh.
It's not true that whatever is a female is a woman, because the female cat is female, but it's not a woman.
So you would have to say like a human female.
Now we're getting somewhere, right?
Okay.
So what about, and I'll be honest, I know the way we're understanding gender better and better nowadays as a society, I'm not 100% sure if there might not be an exception to this, but let's say if everybody will allow it for now, that let's say that we all agree that adult human female and woman are mutually inclusive. Whatever is an adult human female is necessarily a woman. Whatever is a woman is necessarily an adult human female. Is that fair for now? Okay, so that's a good example then of a statement of pervasion where the ranges are equal. So let's work with that. Whatever is an adult human female is necessarily a woman. Okay? So ready? Here's my next question. What's a syllogism we could make on the basis of that? There's an infinite number of answers, I think. There's certainly at least 3.5 billion answers. I know that.
Go ahead, Jana.
Sheila is an adult human female because she is a woman.
Yes, except the other way around. The way we said it is whatever is an adult human female is necessarily a woman, right? So follows that the subject, Sheila, is a woman because of being an adult human female, right? Does that make sense? Beautiful, beautiful. Let's think of another one. What's another statement of pervasion where the range of the terms is equal?
Let's see if anybody disagrees with this.
So I'm sorry, you
Whatever
froze?
has feet. Am I still frozen?
I think you're back
Am I
now.
still frozen?
No,
I'm back.
you're okay.
Okay. Whatever living being has fear also wants to live. Whatever
Oh,
living being
interesting.
has fear also is a being that wants to live.
Ooh, that's an interesting one. A sad question is, can we think of any exceptions? Can we think of a human being, a living being that has fear but does not want to live? Yeah, unfortunately, I work a lot with suicidal people, so unfortunately that comes to mind.
Okay. Yeah.
That you might be able to kind of go a little deeper and still make a case there, but I think that would require some more steps at least.
Could tell me if this is too triggering. Anything running away from in fear of being killed is a being that wants to continue living.
I see where you're going. And at first sight, that strikes me as true. Here's what I would say. I don't think the range is the same for both.
I see. Okay.
You see, because I think there are beings who want to continue to live who aren't currently running away in fear.
Okay.
You see?
So
No, this is good.
It's hard.
I told you these things are precious. They're hard to come by, I said, right? Yeah. Sheila?
So could you say that like fear is a feeling and that feeling is an aggregate?
Oh
And
my
therefore
goodness.
fear
Okay.
is I mean, can you?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. Unfortunately, the answer is no, because the way, like, feeling is just a translation that we use for that concept when we're talking about the aggregates. When we say feeling, when we're talking about the aggregates, we're referring very specifically to some level of happiness or suffering or a neutral feeling. It's not the emotions like fear, they're much more complex. They involve several aggregates at once. And emotions involve levels of happiness or unhappiness, but they also involve certain interpretations, and they also involve certain physical sensations, and they also involve certain urges to act.
Okay.
What about whatever is conscious is also knowing?
Okay, good. So here, I think, let's use the strictly Buddhist understandings of those words, right? In Buddhist in the Gelug tradition, the way these words are translated, man, when we're doing logic, we're very precise, right? Then I'm going to go right ahead and tell you, yes, that is true. Conscious, knowing, conscious. Those are two ways of referring to the same thing in the Gelug tradition. So sorry to kind of cut off any kind of debate about that. I just want to get to the point with that one. So in that case, so we're saying whatever is conscious is necessarily knowing, right? So what's a syllogism we could make out of that? Jenna?
Although I'm not sure what comes first.
So what we want to say, what we want to do is we want to say it follows that the subject blank is knowing because of being conscious.
Why does that have to come first?
Because of the direction that, now, given that we're talking about things that have pervasion both ways, you could make a valid syllogism either way, right?
The other ones.
Sorry?
It's just the other ones, the other syllogism.
It's what I want to highlight right now is that if the statement of pervasion that we're working with is whatever is conscious is necessarily knowing, then the only way that could go into a syllogism is by having conscious in the reason and knowing in the predicate. Because think about it this way, I could say to somebody,
Forward pervasion.
Sorry?
It's a forward pervasion.
Yes. And if you think about it in practical terms, I could say to somebody, whatever is conscious is knowing, right? Right. And blah, blah, blah is conscious, right? Right. Therefore, blah, blah, blah is knowing. There's my thesis. There's my conclusion.
The subject, well, maybe somebody else wants to.
No, please.
Done.
The subject mind.
Yeah, good. So it follows that the subject mind is knowing because of being conscious. See?
I would like to say, because I was trying to come up with things so that I could say this.
Yes.
I have to do another one. Insects or an insect.
Yes.
Is knowing because it is conscious.
Yes, exactly. That's it. That's right.
And
That's
that
exactly right.
to me would be something I wouldn't normally say. I wouldn't normally think insects are knowing.
There you go.
And when you said, and then a lot of things follow from that, because I try to be nice to insects, but I'm normally just nice to them for compassion's sake. But to think that insect knows what's going on is different. I have to think that
I know a lot.
follows, must follow from that.
Insects know a lot.
Say that again?
Insects know a
Yeah,
lot.
I would never.
A lot of insects are social animals and they know a lot. They know when to run away. They know what they like. They know how to arrange themselves so they can reproduce. They know a lot.
It's really true. I love like sometimes just watching an ant, and if you watch it closely, it's almost like a puppy. It's amazing. It's like it does its thing, it's anyway, like Janice said, thank you, Jana. It was very well put. This is probably going to be a little easier next, which is let's think of some statements of pervasion where the first term is smaller than the second term, where the pervasion only goes in one direction. So just to give you an example of what I mean, it would be like whatever is a bachelor is necessarily human. even though it's not true that whatever is human is necessarily a bachelor.
Whatever is a dog is necessarily a mammal.
Whatever is a dog is necessarily a mammal. There you go. So how could we use that in a syllogism?
So, Rupi is a mammal because of being a dog.
Exactly. That's it. That's it. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. What about this? Whatever is sleeping is necessarily breathing. What do you think? Is that true?
I guess so.
Right? I think so.
Mhm.
So then we could make a syllogism out of that if we see a sleeping person, right? This an if, it's a hypothetical, but if I see a sleeping person, then I could say, okay, that person is breathing because they are sleeping.
Sleep apnea, they say they stop breathing.
Ah, good, good, good. So what you would say, if I said that in debate, you'd say to me, there's no pervasion. And then you'd give me that example and you'd show me, right? But what are some other statements of pervasion that work, where the first term is smaller than the second?
Whatever is a cat is necessarily not a reptile.
Nice. Whatever is a cat is necessarily not a reptile, right? The only way that would be untrue is if we could think of something that is a cat and a reptile, which I sure can't. So how could we use that in a syllogism?
So the subject, my cat, or Sheila's cat, it's a better subject since I don't have one. The subject, Sheila's cat, is necessarily not a reptile because it is a cat.
Exactly. Exactly. Right. Let's do another one. What's another statement of pervasion?
I don't know if this, I'm just trying to make something that would work. Whatever would leave a negative imprint on your mind would also not be beneficial or would not lead one to happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Because so that would be that, because what leads not one to happiness is very big, but not doesn't leave a good imprint in your mind would be one of those things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's
Then
no
go ahead, Jana, please continue.
finish.
No, I would love to hear what you had to say.
There's no pervasion.
You would say there's no pervasion?
I would
You
say
think
no pervasion. Yeah.
you think you can think of something that leaves a negative imprint in the mind but does lead to happiness?
Yeah, we transform problems into happiness. So it doesn't follow that whatever.
Ah. Leaves a negative imprint in the mind. Does not lead to happiness. Wow, I wouldn't have thought of that. I would not have thought of that, but you might be right.
But I would counter that you're going too far into the future because because it did leave a negative impact, and then you had to 200 years later do something to like fix it later. You didn't fix it at the moment. It would be kind of like I smashed my cake and left the mushy cake all over my kitchen, and then when I came home at 6 o'clock, patted myself on the back for what a good cleaning job I did and told myself that smashing of the cake was the best thing I ever did for myself and that it was only beneficial to myself, which notwithstanding the fact it would be ignoring a big, I would not have had to clean up my kitchen if I hadn't smashed my own cake, do you know? So I would say, of course, it's complex, but still, it did leave a big mess for a good afternoon. So
I love this. I love this. I think if we were to use like some of the very, very advanced teachings on mind training, on transforming problems into happiness, there might, in some very rare circumstances, be some cases where we could do something and immediately transform it. Having said that, if we did that, then it wouldn't leave a negative imprint in the mind, right?
that's
So,
what, if you define the negative imprint is literally on your mind, it like felt
right,
really bad to you. But if you
right,
smashed cake all over your kitchen for the benefit of yourself and felt
right,
great joy because you needed to clean it, then that
right,
would be a negative imprint.
exactly. That's a funny but very good analogy. Yes, so I think this is fantastic. Like, see, we're doing it already. Like, we did it informally, but we did it. We just had a debate, and I feel like I gained some clarity from it, and this was fun. But I think we could say, I think we could safely say, I think that whatever leaves a negative imprint in the mind necessarily does not lead to happiness on its own. Right? Like, we might, if we have very advanced techniques and we're very masterful, we might subsequently transform it such that it does lead to happiness, but on it, all on its own, it won't. Right? So how can we use that in a syllogism? So again, whatever leaves a negative imprint in the mind necessarily does not lead to happiness on its own.
Taking something that's not yours, that you know you shouldn't take, leaves a negative imprint in mind.
Yes.
Therefore, well, also whatever the other thing.
Yes. And so the way we would phrase it, and this is important, is we would say the subject taking something which isn't yours and that you know you shouldn't take does not lead to happiness on its own because of leaving a negative imprint in the mind.
It's hard to remember to say.
It takes practice, but it comes. It takes practice, but it comes. And there's a reason we say it that way. There's a reason we say it that way. My history of learning this stuff has been a history of thinking like, oh, this is just a formality, it doesn't matter. And then subsequently learning and understanding like, oh my God, no, it matters very much. Can we think of one more statement of pervasion where the first term is smaller than the second?
So could you say putting in the money in the bank doesn't necessarily make you a millionaire?
Yes.
And therefore, just because I have money in the bank doesn't mean I'm a millionaire.
Yes. Yes. That is all 100% true.
Yes.
That is, well, I mean, I'm sorry, I don't know about you being a millionaire. That part I don't know. But it's 100% true that doesn't mean you're a millionaire. That is denying a statement of pervasion. That is saying it is not true that whatever has money in the bank necessarily is a millionaire. You see? And the way we can use that in debate, but the way we would use it would be a little different. It wouldn't go in a syllogism that way. A syllogism needs a categorical statement of pervasion. It can't just have the negation of a statement of pervasion. So, like, for example, you could say, like, here's something that isn't true, but it isn't true that whatever has money in the bank necessarily is not a millionaire. That's not true, but that would be a statement of pervasion. Whatever has money in the bank is necessarily not a millionaire. That would be a statement of pervasion. It just happens to be false. I imagine some millionaires must have money in the bank. Right? Whatever is X is necessarily not Y is fine. Whatever is X is not necessarily Y. That's not a statement of pervasion. That's denying a statement of pervasion. Do you see why? One is saying, whatever, like, for, to go back to Jana's example, whatever is a cat is necessarily not a reptile. Necessarily. Right? The other would be, whatever is a mammal is not necessarily a cat. I'm just kind of saying there are other options too. This is one of the options, but there are other options too. Whereas when I say whatever is a cat is necessarily not a reptile, there are no other options. Frankly, the only thing confusing about that is the grammar in English. They're very different statements. Does anybody want to try one more statement of pervasion? Well, what if I said something like, whatever is a pine tree is necessarily a tree? Right? I think that's unexceptionable. So I'm gonna go about this in a slightly different way than we've done so far, but I'm gonna say the subject, my mother-in-law's house, there has been a tree inside it because there has been a pine tree inside it, namely during Christmas. You see? Now, you guys don't have any way of knowing whether it's true that my mother-in-law's house has had a pine tree inside it. But if you did know that, right, then suddenly you'd know, oh my gosh, your mother-in-law's house has had a tree inside it, which is something that we probably wouldn't normally think. Does that make sense?
This is so silly, but do you know that the commercial tricks are for kids?
Yes.
That would be another one you could work with.
Yes,
whatever
if that were true.
Trick cereals is for kids, but they
Yes.
said.
That's right.
Right.
We could certainly figure out some consequences from that.
Not necessarily true unless
Exactly.
you believe them.
Right. But let's say if that were true, then it would follow that the subject, tricks being enjoyed by an adult, is for kids because of being tricks. If they were telling the truth. But technically, even there, when they say tricks are for kids, or tricks are for kids, that's really a statement of quality, at least on the surface.
Whatever is a park is necessarily a natural area.
Okay. All right. Let's go with that. Let's go with that. I think if we wanted to, we could maybe bring up some qualms, but let's go with that. So if it's true that whatever is a park is necessarily a natural area, what's an example of a syllogism we could build based on that?
Yes, well, I guess there are some exceptions to that, but yeah, assuming that's true, yes.
Yeah, if it were true.
If it were true, then yeah, no, it's not true. But anyway,
I know.
the Grand
But
Canyon, the Grand Canyon is a natural area because of being a park.
there you go. Beautiful, right? Now, here's an interesting point about that. Like, let's say that were true still. Then if somebody came to me and said, oh, I hate living where I live, there is no natural area anywhere nearby, then I could say, oh no, there is a natural area at Betty White Park. If we're going to name a park, it might as well be Betty White. At the Betty White Park, the Betty White Park is a natural area because it's a park. You see, like it shifts it. The point is that this can help us shift our perspective on things. It can help us realize things that we were missing before. Like I told you the joke that my friend tells about Bruce Willis being a man named Bruce. You know, if it's true, which it is, that whatever is Bruce Willis is necessarily a man named Bruce, then we could say, you know, like I know, well, I'm trying to think what would be like an interesting, I know a famous actor named Bruce because I know Bruce Willis, right? The subject I is aware of a famous actor named Bruce because of being aware of Bruce Willis. Whereas if you had just asked me, can you think of any famous actor named Bruce? I would have said like, no, who's named Bruce? That's a silly example, but I kind of like it. What I want to do in the last few minutes, did anybody have any questions about anything we've covered at any point so far?
I suppose I don't know if this is too far-fetched. I just wanted to know, I don't know how to do this. Would you call the Tibetan schools around the Prasangita like close Buddhist schools? Because it would seem the Dalai Lama and Lama Tsongkhapa, I don't want to say have strong disagreements, but it's a pretty big disagreement on like what the nature of reality is.
Between?
Like what Lama Tsongkhapa says, and then the other schools that are the Tibetan schools that
yes,
agree with it. And my follow-up question to that, is it okay to call it close Buddhist schools, and then do all those schools use this type of debate? Because in the Dalai Lama book, one of the things, he didn't go into it because he was just giving a class to normal people, I suppose. But when he talked about it, he mentioned the disagreement on the subject, and it sounded like what this class was talking about. And I thought, oh, well, Lama Tsongkhapa was probably doing this type of debate way back then.
Oh, yes.
And so if I was to reread that book with this in mind, it might actually understand it a little differently, because some of the reasoning why it is that those schools couldn't debate each other on more like in disagreement was because of the fact that they couldn't do the normal debates or something like that.
That's awesome.
So like,
there's always a way to do the debate. but let me say a couple of things. If you read Shantideva's Bodhicharyavatara, the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, a lot of it is written in the format of a debate like this, even way back then. This goes way back to India. And many Buddhist texts are written in the form of debates. And when we don't know Buddhist debate, we can kind of get the gist of it, but some things can be really confusing. But when we know Buddhist debate, then we can read the text and understand what's happening, which is one reason that I think this is so helpful too. But did your question, part of your question was, is it fair to call this the Tibetan schools? Was the word you said close? Is that what you said? Like kind of close to each other? Is that what you meant?
Yeah, because I guess I'm having a hard time understanding, but the difference between how it is that Lama Tsongkhapa is saying that, I don't want to misspeak, so I was going to say the nature in which you understand existence seems to me to be a vastly different universe than if somebody says there is an inherent existence somewhere. Sounds like that's another universe of
Right.
philosophy.
Right.
But these are people who are studying like in the same country,
Right.
probably in a university that's like around the mountain. And they're
Right.
probably talking to each other a lot and
Right.
holding debates and like traveling,
Right.
and meeting each other. Are they friends with each other? Because
Right.
when the debates seem really powerful and, seem very spirited, and
Yes.
Amathon Kappa at some time seems quite upset with some of the people that he's talking about. Not necessarily the people in Tibet, but there is one Chinese monk that he hates quite a lot.
Oh.
So
Well,
Shang, he doesn't like Ha Shang, and I want to figure out who Ha Shang is.
I don't know either, but
Shang
I
debated
think
Kamala Shila.
Say it again.
As far as I know, Shang debated Kamala Shila.
was he the one who defended the Chan tradition?
He was, was that what he was doing? They were, it's been a while. He was a student he became a student of Kamala Shila. Kamala Shila won the debate.
Right. That's fascinating. But
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
No, I was going to go on. Did you want to say more?
Go.
Okay. Just to answer the question more broadly, first of all, I think to answer on a very practical level, Tibet has always been populated by human beings, inter alia, but certainly human beings, and human beings are never immune to politics, unfortunately. And so that's always been a reality there too. So that have the schools always gotten along on a political level? Not always. Thankfully, that's very different now. Nowadays, the schools do really get along, but it's been different at different times. On a philosophical level, and on a spiritual level, if you sometimes when you read like the vehement disagreements that the technical term is polemics, like when you read the polemics that some of these great figures had with each other's writings, and you look at the reasoning that they're using, it's a straw man type of thing. They're not actually refuting each other. That's my impression anyway. I think I was reading something, I think it was by Gorampa, like trying to refute Lama Tsongkhapa, but like what he was saying was not at all what Lama Tsongkhapa says. So there are definitely lots of tenets that the different schools, the different Tibetan schools hold differently. So for example, like one classic example is that the Gelug school says that the mind is impermanent, and at least one of the other schools, if not more, says that say that the mind is permanent. And so it seems like, well, clearly they disagree, right? Clearly, like if one is wrong, the other must be. If one is right, then the other must be wrong. And yet, when you look closer at it, it has to do with just the way they're defining the word impermanent. Gelug defines the word impermanent as not lasting for more than one moment at a time before being replaced by its own successor. Whereas the other school that says the mind is permanent defines impermanent as something that comes to an end eventually and doesn't continue anymore. Everybody agrees that the mind doesn't last 2 moments before giving rise to its successor, and everybody agrees that the mind doesn't end. So the fact that some say that it's permanent, some say it's impermanent, it's just different ways that the word is being used. So that's one type of thing. And that's a very kind of like gross and obvious one, but I think there are much more subtle ones like that. Do they all use debate? My understanding is that yes. My understanding is that they all do use debate, all 4. However, they place different amounts of emphasis on debate. And the Gelug school certainly is the one that places the most emphasis on debate. And this has to do with my impression is that this has to do with the way the different schools explain and understand the 2 truths. My impression of it is that they seem to draw the lines in different places, like, which is this truth and which is that truth. Like, it's a convention. So like some draw the line here, but some draw the line there. And because of that, they come to different claims. Let me put it this way. Some of the other schools think that too much conceptualizing isn't helpful, that you need to sit down and have experience right away. But the Gelug school thinks that conceptualizing is crucial. It's the only way, for example, that you can determine what's a helpful thing to do and what's an unhelpful thing to do. So there are different paths, but they all work and they all lead to the same truths. There's one exception, which is we tend to think of the 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has actually recognized 2 more. He's recognized Bon as being one of the schools of Tibetan Buddhism, but he's also recognized Jonang, which is a different school, but it's tiny compared to the others. So now we speak of the 6 schools of Tibetan Buddhism. Well, within the Jonang school, there's a division. And one of the divisions of the Jonang school is incorrect, according to all the other schools. It's just outright mistaken, according to all the other schools. But the other division of the Jonang school is accurate, just like the other schools. And the incorrect claim made by the incorrect division of the Jonang school is that it basically said there is an inherently existing self. They would say that, and incidentally, I don't know if there's anybody left who says this nowadays. This is historical. I don't know. There might be somebody left who says this, but I've never come across it. This is like in centuries ago. Some would have said that that Buddha nature inherently exists, and that when Shakyamuni Buddha was talking about emptiness, he was saying that as a means to an end for us to realize Buddha nature. all the other schools disagree with that, and it seems to me that that could be fairly easily disproven. But as far as I know, like that's the only doctrinal difference that I'm aware of. Okay. We're at a point where we have set in place the heart of everything that we're going to need to be able to do Tibetan debate. What's funny is that the actual tools, like the actual words that we're going to be using, we actually haven't gotten to yet, which might seem disheartening, but don't be disheartened. Do you remember the Karate Kid? Wax on, wax off, wax on, wax off. And it's like, why? And then at the end, it's like, okay, now wax on, wax off. And it's like, ta-da, you know? That's what we're doing. Like we're waxing a car, even though that's not what we're ultimately going to be doing, but this is what's going to get us through. This is what's going to happen. The book that we're using, it's designed in an interesting way where the actual words that we're going to speak, all of that doesn't come until close to the end of the book, which is interesting. But just to give you a little tiny bit of a sneak peek, just so that you see where we're heading. In time, what we're going to learn to do is we're going to learn to transform syllogisms into consequences. So into prasagas. I'll tell you right now how you do it in practice is by saying the words, it follows that, before you say the syllogism. Okay? The moment you say it follows that, and then you say a syllogism, you're actually saying a consequence. But it's radically different and it works in a different way and it's fascinating. And this was another thing that for years I thought like, oh, come on, it's just a formality. Like I don't need to say it follows that. What difference does it make? It makes a difference. And once somebody says a consequence, which structurally works the same way as a syllogism, there are only three possible answers that you can give. Again, this comes later, but I just want you to have a sense of where we're heading. If somebody were to say, for example, it follows that the subject, Snoopy, is a mammal because of being a dog. I can think about it, and there's only three valid things that I could say. I could say, I accept that Snoopy is a mammal. I could say, the reason is not established, meaning I don't know that Snoopy is a dog. Or I could say there's no pervasion, which means I don't know that everything that is a dog is necessarily a mammal. That's it. Other than that, the only other thing I could say is come again, right? Like short of that, there's nothing else I can say, right? That exhausts all the possible permutations. And then depending on which one of these I say, the other person that I'm debating with, there will be like a logical place for them to go. So if I say I accept that Snoopy is a mammal, then they're going to continue with their line of reasoning. Okay, so if Snoopy is a mammal, then blah, 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 right? If I say the reason is not established, meaning I don't know that Snoopy is a dog, then what they're going to set out to do is show me that Snoopy is a dog. They're going to prove to me that Snoopy is a dog using further consequences. And if I say there is no pervasion, meaning I don't know that everything that is a dog is necessarily a mammal, then what they're going to set out to do is they're going to set out to show me that everything that is a dog is necessarily a mammal using a different line of consequences to do that, right? And so what this does, I think you might begin to see, among other things, is this, it goes through like a conversation where we're trying to understand something, goes from being us to kind of just dropped in the jungle and we have no idea. We could go any one of 360 ways. And it just, without losing anything, it transforms it into a situation where there's 3 paths. And if we get lost, if we take a path and it leads to a dead end, we can retrace our steps and try the next one. Right? So we're certain to arrive somewhere. It's just brilliant. Truly, it's brilliant. Like sometimes I think that it's making human thinking digital almost. You know? It's very, very cool. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there because we're kind of going through it, and I just want you to know like where we're headed. So for next time, what I'd like to ask us to do is to read chapter 8, which is the 3 types of correct signs. And yeah, I think I'll go ahead and say this, that this is another one of these things that I think is exceedingly helpful to know. And it's, again, it's not one that you'll need to use like in the course of debate. You know, I don't know why I find it helpful to say that. I guess it's because otherwise it can feel overwhelming. Like, how am I going to keep all of this in mind at the same time? You won't have to keep all of it in mind at the same time. You need to know this so that you can have confidence in the method, but then you just use the method. You know, like you don't need to remember how a combustion engine works while you're driving the car. Something like that. That's not a great analogy, actually, but whatever. All right. Good times. Thank you all so much. Let's end with a dedication. And so let's just think in this time that we've spent together, so many imprints have been created in the mind. These imprints are certain to move our minds in different directions. And so we think, may these imprints move our minds only in ways that bring us more compassion, more loving kindness, that make us more compassionate, more kind, more loving, greater equanimity, greater peace, the greater wisdom, so that we can see the path for helping everybody achieve enlightenment. In other words, may all of these positive imprints be so that we may achieve perfect enlightenment for the sake of all beings, to bring them all to enlightenment. Thank you, thank you, thank you.